patient. And I want to thank the people who got here like 20 seconds ago who were outside and were incredibly patient. So thank you all. I'm delighted that you're here. As Matt said, it's a real thrill to be Executive Director of the Bay Area Video Coalition. I've been on the job for about a year, and it's taken me a year just to learn all the many things we do. One question I'm going to start out with. For whom is this your first time at BAVC? Who's coming tonight to BAVC for the first time? Wow, you all sat on this side of the table. What do all the old timers know about what's in the ground?
I don't know. I'm afraid to look up because apparently all the experienced people sat on that side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm sure when we get to the Q&A, you'll hear. Well, I'm delighted that we've got a great mix of people who know BAVC, and I hope many of you over there, I think most of you are members and are participants in some of our programs, and that for all the folks who are here for the first time, I hope you enjoy Alex's presentation. I know you will. But on your way out, I hope you'll just grab one of our flyers, brochures, check out our website, and find ways to come on back. We do many things for people working in the technology sector, artists, activists, documentary filmmakers, community producers who want to show on public access television. We do media preservation. The list goes on. But I think if you do anything in your life with a computer or a video camera, then you should be a member of BAVC. So that's about as comprehensive a pitch as I can make. But we teach lots of classes in software and design that you might find useful. And we put on events like this one this evening, which gives me special pleasure because I've been a friend of Alex's for over 10 years. We met in the midst of the dot-com boom here in San Francisco, working at a startup just a few blocks away on Bryant Street around 1999, 2000. And I was the content guy, brought in to figure out how this new piece of technology was supposed to communicate with regular consumers about where they wanted to go at night and arts and entertainment options in cities around the world. And then there were a bunch of engineers. And then there was Alex, who I don't think ever had one title, but kind of operated in this startup environment as the person who put all the threads together. And that's really what I think you'll learn a lot about tonight and what is the subject of this extraordinary book, which I'm very happy to have been able to read even before it got published, and I'm delighted to see that it's out and about now. Because what Alex has done over his career, and some of you may know him, some of you may not, is really put together the theory and the practice of getting good ideas to come to life and to come to the marketplace. He is an entrepreneur who's had great success with his own company, Leonid Systems, and has also worked with many other entrepreneurs at different stages in their development, from very basic idea conception to really rolling it out and being part of major companies that have had an extraordinary effect on the world in which we live. I won't go on and on about the Christmas cards that Alex sends me, which portray his extraordinary sense of humor, but it suffices to say that we're really in for a treat tonight because we have somebody who, and I'll just keep hyping you up so you can see who really can speak in a very clear layperson's terms about some concepts that can be really mystifying. And that kind of brings it back to me about the mission that we're on here at BAVC. We exist as a nonprofit organization to demystify technology so that anybody who wants to tell their story, wants to make change in a community, wants to throw an idea out to the world and see what it can do, that the technology isn't the barrier. And I think Alex takes this one step farther and helps us to see that sometimes it's not just that it's the technology that's the barrier between engineers and entrepreneurs getting together and understanding one another's language. It's the way in which they relate, and it's the way in which they come around a table and share their ideas. And if you can get over that barrier, then given all the incredible tools that are available to innovators today, really the sky's the limit for where you can go and the kind of ideas you can take forward and the kind of success you can have in building your own company if that's what you want to do. So without further ado, please join me in giving a really, really big warm welcome to Alex Cowan.
Thanks a lot for coming. So we're going to talk about a few things here. I will introduce myself first. I run a company called Leonid Systems, which builds enterprise software for service providers, companies like Verizon and France Telecom. And I've also just published a book with Wiley this April called Starting a Tech Business. And what Starting a Tech Business is about, as Mark said, is bringing your ideas to life. And my particular area of interest is there's a lot of acclaim and excitement about the opportunities in high tech today, and there's a lot of new ideas that everybody likes and generally agrees on. But the interesting thing is there's a gigantic void between actual practice and all these new ideas, and that's really my area of interest. Why are so few people actually doing these things, and how do you broaden the base of people that can take advantage of these ideas? And that's what the book is about, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Let's talk about you guys for a second. I've assumed a couple things. First, you guys have the desire to learn about launching new ideas. And the second thing is I have not presupposed that you have any background, any technical topics, software programming, systems, anything like that. And finally, I've assumed that you want to learn things you can take action on, unlike a TED Talk or something, where we're all talking about these great, interesting ideas. My goal is that you guys can walk out of here with things that you can go sit down and apply tomorrow. So we have an hour together. We're going to talk first about 4 big ideas in high tech that you can go out and actually apply. Second, we're going to go through some examples of how to apply those ideas. And then we're going to go through some exercises and examples on those things. So the 4 things we're going to cover are ideation, planning, organization, and development, product development. And we're going to go through kind of the old way of doing things and these new ideas that are increasingly applicable and relevant in high tech.
So was the iPod on purpose?
Where was the iPod? Oh, was it?
iPod. Go back one
yeah,
slide.
It was on purpose. Okay. Everything we're going to do is on purpose. It's funny that the software that Mark and I worked on together became the basis for the iPod, actually, through a company called Pixo. Cool. In a very weak way. So ideation is the process of pulling together the conceptual basis for your product or your service. And kind of the old way of doing things was self-love. There's a lot of self-love. There was this idea that your idea was your baby and you stuck with it to the end, bitter or sweet or whatever. And while this is a very classical idea in some ways, I would say that this kind of culminated in the dot-com period, the late to mid-90s. And the new way of approaching things is this rubric of design thinking, which involves empathy, looking at your customers, and focusing your creative energies around what you're actually going out and observing. So I said this was a very classical idea, the self-love thing. Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so there's a certain amount of validity to that. I think he was probably right. If you're really breaking new ground, that there is a certain applicability to that stick with your guns thing, but look at Ford now. It's most important and absolutely, indisputably important once you have product in the market that you focus your energies on going out and learning about how real customers are actually using your product. And I would say that the pillars of design thinking, the first one is empathy. So this is a seamstress. She's sewing, but seamstresses spend a lot of time cutting things. And so somebody who had a high degree of empathy for the seamstress designed sewing scissors. Who's picked up a pair of sewing scissors before? They're great. You can sit there and you can cut things for hours. Your hands don't hurt. They're very dexterous. And you don't necessarily have to be the person to go out and sit down and maybe think, I can't create a pair of scissors, I don't know how to cut metal or whatever, and maybe you can't, but you can absolutely be the person that goes out and talks to seamstresses and figures out what's really important to them and how they're using products and what they would like. Luckily, there's some ready-made tools in high tech that really loan themselves to this design thinking. The first one is personas. So a persona is a vivid, first-person perspective on your buyer. Everything that relates to how they're going to find out about your product, buy it, use it, reuse it, rebuy it, all of this is relevant to the persona. And I've been working with a lot of tech teams and the folks at my own company, and this is an example. This is a bad persona. This information, this is a demographic sketch of a woman with a kid. This data came off the internet, so did the photo. Those percentages down at the bottom look like they came off of some questionnaire. And this is a really important point. You can't create personas this way. You have to be really actually out, as uncomfortable as it might be to walk in and talk to these people or get opportunities to talk to them. It's really, otherwise, if you don't do that, you'll learn very little, if nothing. This is a good persona, at least the start of one. So you can see the picture here. It's very low fidelity. It was taken with an iPhone out in the field, which is where you should be when you're developing personas. And you can see that this material about the persona, it's like a story about this person, a narrative. And we want to know this persona like we know our best friend. Things that seem perhaps insignificant about them are actually very important for painting a vivid picture, and they may come into play as you're developing your product in ways that you couldn't possibly anticipate.
Does persona just mean market?
No, a persona is, we're going to develop some personas in the next section. A persona is absolutely not a market. I mean, people say a market, well, that's, construction workers 25 to 45. Persona is Joe's a construction worker. He gets up at 6 a.m. every morning and he goes to a construction site. He works hard. He usually gets off early at like 2 p.m. He likes to go have 30 beers with his friends in his local place, PRs. And I was a construction worker for a brief period of time, so I can, if you want to work on that more later, I can.
But then do you have groups of personas with maybe more markets?
Perhaps, but the point is there's a tendency to go and say, well, I'm going to go after this market. It's you can do things like say how big it is, and, stuff like that. It's actually not that important. The access to that kind of data is so commoditized that what you should do is learn about this person intimately, vet your product idea against that, and then you worry about how big this market is. The cost to acquire customers today is so low in most areas that if you have a really, really relevant understanding of this individual, you can probably, very likely make a business out of it.
So persona is the story of a person who might want to use your product.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
But it starts way earlier than you developing the product. You find a persona.
Absolutely.
You tailor the product to that.
Yes, definitely. And we're gonna. So the next step after you work in this persona is to construct stories about these personas. So a story is not. It's not just a general statement about this person. It comes out of a technique called Agile that we'll talk about later, and it has a very specific syntax which really helps you think through the whole action that your persona wants to take relevant to your product. It has these three components. Whatever your persona is, I want to do something so that I can derive a benefit. And the interesting thing about this is there's three components. And when I'm working with my own staff at Leonid and the startup side coach, the most frequent thing that everybody leaves out is this third item, the derive a benefit item. And that's actually the most important one, especially in the early phases. And the reason is that establishes the motivation. Why do I believe that they want to do this thing in question? And that's the thing you really need to be asking yourself a lot in the early stages of your product development, and you're coming to understand the user.
Alex, can you have a persona for a corporation?
Yeah.
Because then you're developing products for service providers. So couldn't that same concept apply to what a service provider, as a service provider, want to do something so I can derive that benefit?
No. You can't really develop a product that way. Service provider, Verizon employs 80,000 people that do such an array of different things. When we develop, so Leonid, as Viv mentions, my company sells software to phone companies, cable companies, people that sell communication services. And when we develop personas, we do a couple different personas. For example, we have different types of. They sell a lot of the time. What we work with them on, for example, is a business telephony. They go out and sell cloud business telephony services. So we work for personas that we help them on their customers, which is where I would start. Is I'm a small business owner and I have 20 people and I want to save money on my phone system and I need to be able to deal with it and administer it and I do this and I do that and I care about this. Then we have personas for different types of users, the receptionist, the guy that really doesn't care or woman who doesn't really care about their phone, which is like 80% of people, the person that's out in the field a lot. Those are the personas we develop. Then over at the service provider, for instance, we have people that their job is to get orders and provision stuff, create accounts. There's people whose job is somebody calls up and says, hey, my phone's broken, they have to fix it. So a persona, you should be able to walk into your target company, customer, segment market, and readily be able to identify somebody that fits with a persona with a few simple questions. And it definitely isn't something you can generally do at the firm level, unless it's like a law firm, maybe, right? Like they're all lawyers. Or I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. So the stories are important because this is how you start to establish what people actually want to do with the products and why. And so the main thing about design thinking is to have this interest in really getting into the nitty-gritty of learning about your customers. And as long as you want to do that, you don't have to be a professional designer, have a design degree to do design thinking. You just have to care, and you have to not want to produce crap, which I think is the best possible aspiration you can have in this area. This is stenciled by the mysterious and wonderful street artist BAVC in front of the Tate, which is an art institution in the UK. Planning. So once you go and you vet your ideas, how do you actually set yourself up to see if you can make a business out of this and figure that out very quickly so you don't waste a lot of time and money on something that's just not going to make sense. So the old way was you had a 5-year plan. This is kind of a thing where big companies did this, totalitarian governments did this, and it seemed like a good idea. We look at what we're going to do 5 years out, and then we come to the end of that and plan again. But this doesn't suit a startup at all. I mean, a startup by definition has a tremendous amount of uncertainty inherent in it, and so a much better fit is this idea of iterative management. So you create a set of ideas about what the business is going to do and a criteria to validate them, and then you move through that. And what this idea of iterative management has been tremendously helpful for startups. It was popularized in a book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Is that the 5-year plan was called The Big Lie by VCs. Everybody kind of felt like they had to do it, but nobody really expected it to bear out in any way. They hoped that it did, but it never did. The thing is, the alternative was an equally unmanageable lack of any plan at all, and that's not good either. You absolutely have to have a plan and be purposeful. So the great thing is that there was a wonderful standby substitute for these things all along, and it's just science, the scientific method. So in science, you get an idea, and then you form a hypothesis about that idea, which is a statement that is provable or disprovable with a certain set of experiments. And so you think of an experimental design. You run these experiments, and in a startup, the whole point is to take the assumptions that are most important, easiest to vet, and validate them as cheaply as you possibly can. You look at this, and then you figure out, am I right? Is this something I should pursue and scale up and invest in more? If not, you go back, you revise your idea, and you try again. And if you are right, if you do have a valid idea, then you go through, and that's when you pursue it, you scale it up. And this is nice because in a startup, you have this very difficult pairing of uncertainty and urgency that you have to manage around. And this is a great way and a very visible way for your team to understand the business and to organize around it. So the first tool for actually doing this is a simple table of your most critical assumptions. So this table should have a priority. I think that's actually the most important individual thing in an assumption, because again, the key thing is to think through, how do I validate the easy, important assumptions and get that figured out. The next thing it has is a view of whether it does in fact need to be proven. Moms use Facebook. Well, you don't need to prove that. It's just, there's public data. Nobody's going to think it's not true. Then you need to think of experiments to prove or disprove this stuff. We're going to go through some examples, because if you're creative, there's a lot of lightweight ways to do this, especially with all the tools that are available online. So an example of an assumption that needs proving is parents want to better organize the distribution of kids' allowances. Well, I don't know, do they? That probably you need to prove. And you could do something like spend $100 or $50 on Google Ads, post up a proposition about this, or a couple different variances of that proposition, see if people click through on it, see if the page they end up on, they want to sign up for something, or they click through to learn more. That's a very, very valid way to validate your idea initially at, you can do it on a weekend for almost no money at all. Do you need to validate that parents have smartphones? No, you don't. That's an easy assumption. So with this idea that the 5-year plan doesn't make sense for startups, what takes its place? Well, there was a a guy named Alex Osterwalder who came up with the idea, along with a few collaborators, of a business model canvas. So the idea is that this is somewhere between a business plan and a napkin sketch of a business. There's 9 key areas where you go through and you answer a few key questions about the business. And this is good because it's a very ready tool for a couple of founders to sit down and really make sure they've thought through everything that the startup is going to entail. We're going to go through one of these in the next segment. Lastly, you want to have your numbers together, and this is an area where we actually want to be very detail-oriented, because paradoxically or not, having a very tightly engineered financial plan, in fact, it should really be month by month for a startup, that will keep you from having to worry about money every day. So you want to come up with a plan that is tenable for you, and then you want to just work the plan and not have to worry about money every single day. So you want to have, a GL as a place to keep your expenses, but most importantly, you want to have a forward-looking model. And there's a template for this on the book's website, alexandercowan.com, and we're going to go through a couple outputs of that in the next segment. So these are, I think, the 3 most, if it's not a 5-year plan, what is it? Well, I think these 3 things are the best available tools for doing the initial vetting of a startup or a new product idea within an existing company. Set of assumptions, the business model canvas, and a relatively tightly put together financial model. So let's go through this idea of using the scientific method one more time with a little more specifics about startups. The first thing you want to ask yourself about your idea is, do I have real evidence from my buyer that this is compelling? And you can get there with these tools that we talked about on design thinking. The second thing you want to ask is form your hypothesis, and that's the table of assumptions we went over. Then you want to design experiments, the cheapest, easiest, fastest experiments you can think of to prove or disprove those various assumptions. Then you should be able to sit down and say, hey, was I right or was I wrong? If I was wrong, how do I revise this and try it again? And if I was right, let's go to the next step and scale this up. The next area we have is organization. So you go through, you have a plan for this business, you have an idea you think is compelling. How do you actually pull it together without spending a huge amount of money and making it real hard on yourself? The old way of doing this was what I call aping. There was this idea that if a startup acts like a big company and hires people from big companies, they'll become a big company by imitation. And this was a very destructive misperception, especially in the dot-com period. And a lot of money was wasted on this. A startup is fundamentally different than a large company. And there's this idea of customer development, which is this proposition that a startup is fundamentally different than a large company and needs to organize itself differently. That was introduced in a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany by a man named Steve Blank. And his whole thing was, much money is wasted by these small companies aping these big companies, and instead, what you should have is a customer development team. And we actually do this at my company at Lean. We have a relatively traditional organization for our mature products that we know what the proposition is, who buys them, how they use them. Development makes it, sales sells it, operations supports it. And then we create these customer development teams for new products where we think we have a general idea about what we ought to do, but we really don't know exactly the contours of this product, who's going to buy it, why, what we need to do. A customer development team is very flat. Everybody's very hands-on. They don't follow very formal processes. And we're going to talk more about how that looks in a second. One key thing is, I think there's this misinformation that customer development says that big companies are bad, and that's absolutely not true. Plenty of startups actually falter because they don't create large-scale organizations after they initially have a small, agile team that puts this stuff together. And so it's not that big companies are bad, it's big company structures are bad, it's that they're inappropriate and ill-suited to the things that a startup needs to do. So let's look at this from the standpoint of a founding event all the way to the first board meeting in the sort of battle way. So the first thing that happens, our founders have a great new idea. The second thing is they create a 5-year plan that shows a 10x return, because that's what a VC wants to see. And this requires a chain of assumptions that's so tenuous that they would have better luck winning the lottery as possible. But let's say, this is the cycle of this, this way people have done things historically. They get the money, they're in a hot space, the VCs want to do it. The VCs are in kind of a scale business themselves, so they want to put a lot of capital to work. Millions and millions of dollars, otherwise the deal's too small for them. So they encourage these founders to bring in a whole menagerie of experienced executives from big companies, and these folks are kind of come in and apply their recipes that they've created from having big successes at big companies. A classic example is, well, we're going to bring in this VP of sales from this big software company because this dude closes big deals. That's what he does. He's just going to come here and close big deals. But in fact, big company experience is so different than small company experience and startup experience that often works out very poorly. The things that you need to do when you're selling an unproven proposition to an unknown market are completely different than when you're selling a well-understood proposition to a well-understood market, and this frequently fails. These folks also are very uncomfortable with all that uncertainty in many cases. So everybody's scrambling, trying to make this 5-year plan work. It doesn't. Nothing they're doing really conforms to it. The founders have to go face the music with this board who's giving them the money, and they're concocting all these wild, explanations about how what they're doing sort of fits in with the 5-year plan. If you look at it a certain way, and you can kind of see where this goes. It's bad, it's not very fun for anybody, it's kind of nerve-wracking. If you succeed, and many people have in this environment, it's despite all this and not because of it. So let's look at how this works with some of these new ideas that we've talked about. So our founders have a new idea. What are they? The first thing they do, they list out all the key assumptions that are required to be true for this business to work. And then they're out trying to get hands-on, validated data about these assumptions as quickly and as cheaply as they can. And this is great because it reduces the amount of capital they need. They realize they don't need to have sales, marketing, and possibly even a development team until they go and they figure out a few of these things.
And what are they showing the investors?
They're not even talking to the investors yet. These scary looking fellas, these are investors. We're right there. We're getting there. So do they need investors? That question comes up now. I mean, the way that you doing things this way in a stepwise fashion lowers capital requirements, lowers risk, and it opens up a lot of non-traditional funding strategies like bootstrapping it, self-funding it yourself. We haven't taken any venture capital away in it ever. We started off doing consulting, it was relevant to our customers, that helped us build products, and we've never had, we're a multi-million-dollar company now, we've never had to take investment capital, and that's, I don't know if I would do it that way again, but it worked, and it's increasingly common, especially in smaller scale applications like a mobile app or a web delivered application or media product.
You probably also have to not give up as much of your companies.
Zero.
Yeah,
on the whole thing.
No,
So
I mean, even if you take venture capital, if you validated you've validated it's lower
absolutely.
risk. So
you're taking less money
yeah.
against a proposition that's much lower risk and has already been validated. So yeah, and then the VC community has responded to this. And Andreessen Horowitz and there's Band of Angels. There's a lot of venture capital firms that have formed around this new thesis, and they're just not the traditional ones. So these guys maybe they go get venture capital, maybe they don't. If they do, it's not very much, and they're not as beholden to these VCs. Maybe they bring in additional resources, maybe they don't, but if they do, these folks have a very clear set of objectives, which is to validate these assumptions that we talked about earlier. And that's great, because again, in a startup, you have this extremely difficult pairing of uncertainty and urgency. And so you really want to keep people focused, otherwise they just end up all running around, neurotic, crazy, nervous all the time. And so the new hires come in, they're focused on customer development, they know what they need to do, they're moving very fast and in a very measurable cadence towards this pivot or persevere, which is a term from the lean startup, moment where they either validate or invalidate their idea about the business. And at this point, progress is quick and measurable. They're facing the music with the board, which may just be themselves at this point, to founders sitting down and saying, were our assumptions about this business correct or incorrect? If they were incorrect, what should we revise and how do we redo the pivot? And, fun and profit, this is just a much better way to go. The worst thing that can happen is that you learn a whole bunch of things that you can go off and apply somewhere else, in another company or another venture. So the last item we have in this first segment is development. So the old way of doing things is called waterfall development. This is based around building big pieces of technology over long time scales. It's kind of like passing a bill in Congress. You do the requirements, you do the design, and you do the implementation. And it's kind of high-text version of the 5-year plan. Very, very, very ill-suited to startups because it's a long time before you get any working product that you can use to test your propositions. It requires that you know what you want to do up front, which you by definition do not in a startup. And so Agile, which you've probably heard of, is the popular replacement for this. One of the other really great features about Agile that's maybe not as commonly known is that it actually takes the personas and the stories that we talked about as its primary input. You're not expected to specify every last nook and cranny of this product because the people that formulated the Agile Manifesto, they understood that that's just not a reality for a lot of companies that are developing product, and developing it in the face of uncertainty. And you are having discussions with your development team. It's a very collaborative approach. And the other thing is that it uses very short loops, 2 to 6 week cycles. At the end of each of these, you're developing a working product that you can go out and use to validate with customers. So the great thing about that is that it strikes a wonderful balance between having structure, which your development team needs. They can't just be, hey, I have this idea, let's try this. They need some structure to operate against. At the same time, they can't be behind closed doors for a year and then you get to see what they did. So Agile is great in that it strikes that balance. So the Agile Manifesto, there's a lot of orthodox Agile techniques like Scrum and extreme programming, and maybe you've heard these, or maybe your company does this. But the actual Agile Manifesto, which came out in 2001, is actually only 68 words long. It's very, very easy to grasp, and it's written in very human understandable language. And essentially it says they value interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following the plan. And you can probably see that this mirrors a lot of the things that we've already talked about in many ways. And in fact, a lot of these Agile ideas have actually influenced many of these business ideas in the high-tech space. As what would be called in Agile the product owner, that's the role of the person that is going out and writing the user stories and responding to questions about the user to the development team. This is kind of what life is like, and this is a lot, frankly, what I do as the CTO of Lineage. On the software we just released, I'm out working with the team to validate the relevance of what we did. Just because you built it doesn't mean it means anything or is useful or was the right thing to customers. Hopefully it is, but you need to go validate that. So when you're planning, you can decide whether you need to go another direction or keep going that direction and expand. On the current iteration, you're answering questions from the development team around the stories you've written, around the ideas that you communicated, and you'll never get everything in your specs, even if you do a really super job. And on the future iteration, you are looking at what should you do. You're out talking to customers. Again, you're not asking them questions, what should I do next? You're out there observing what they actually do with the product, and it's your job to connect the dots and figure out what it should be. You don't have to detail every little facet of it. You're writing personas, you're updating them, you're writing more user stories. So, in summary on these ideas, design thinking gives us a direction on the product, personas, and user stories that we put into an iterative management framework where we develop a hypothesis about the business and an experimental design to validate our assumptions. Customer development helps us think about how to formulate the roles and the teams and delineate their objectives. And then Agile gives us working product on very short cycles that we can use to go out and redo the loop and see how we're doing.
So, question. So, I know you mentioned this a little bit about Henry Ford and faster horse. So where's room in this model for not going? It seems like everything starts with a persona and what they want. But if, for example, I think it's similar to Steve Jobs, just picking something and going with it, what he thinks people would like, not necessarily asking people what they want and developing a persona. Where's room for that in this model?
That is this model. I mean, Steve Jobs said, never go ask a customer what they want, which I think I'm upset. Right. I think that's absolutely true. But that doesn't mean that he ignored who the customers. I mean, he had a very intuitive and intimate perception of what these people did. And in fact, he had a lot of people telling him, what they were seeing out in the field. I mean, Apple's very good at that. That's not, and Steve Jobs, I think part of his, brilliance was that he just was really able to intuitively identify who was barking at the right tree with those observations and who wasn't. Right. And what it meant. I mean, this happens at every company. You're going to hear things from the field, and 60% of it is going to be, all the time, Elena, we get, the customer wants this. Well, why do they think they want that? Is that really the right thing? Customers will diagnose their own needs and be a little bit myopic about them sometimes. And the good product developer is able to, ask the right questions, train their team to ask the right questions, and then kind of interpolate, well, they think they want X, but really what would really be awesome for them is M. And your customers will appreciate that. I mean, it's not their job to design the product for you.
So there's some intelligence and you get some information about the persona, but you also have to distill from that what you want to take from it, not necessarily what the persona says, and you have the little things, I am this person, this is what I want, and this is how I benefit.
Yeah, I think that what personas, the situation that's the hardest to manage, especially in a tech startup, is you have the business people, the people that are experts on the customer, and then you have the developers responsible for actually building this stuff and making it work. And one of the hardest things is communicating to the developers in vivid terms what the user actually wants to do and unleashing their creativity about what may be possible based on what you're seeing out in the market. That's a very hard thing to do, and Agile is very, very good that way because the empathy that you bring to them in vivid terms with these personas and these user stories helps them focus their creativity around solutions that are actually relevant. So it's really, the interesting approaches to the product really come out in that very last phase, and the Agile development environment is really good for that. It allows you to, have these guys bring their own creativity, and girls, women, to solving the problem and the implementation.
So can you give an example of how it would look if you're not asking your customer or your potential customer what they want? What does the testing of the hypothesis look like? What are your questions?
Absolutely, sure. Well, actually, we're going to go through an example right now. So why don't we go through this, and then and we can revisit that.
So there's two different ways two different ways to enter into this process. One is when you've got an idea about something that you want to do, and you're trying to test that, make sure that it's going to work for what you want to do, and follow that through the process. Mm-hmm. Then there's the other one where you know that there's a need out there. You're going to a client, or a client's coming to you and saying, we want this, or we've got this problem, can you help us fix it? And that's the other path where you don't really know what it is, the ideas that you're creating. You have to talk to them and suss that out from that discussion. Yeah. I guess those are the two different entrances, and I'm not quite seeing how they get into that.
Well, let's say you have an idea and you want to go test it. Okay, that one's probably pretty clear, right? That kind of looks like what we just described. Yeah. And let's say the example we're going to go after here is a team that has a general idea and they find out they're kind of wrong, but actually there's something there that's more interesting. We just had this happen in one of the teams that I'm working with. So we'll go through this example and then we'll revisit that. I think it's a good question. The other thing to think about is this is not a single epiphany. I mean, a good product is a series of many little startups and many little assumptions and many little validations. You've got to be constantly doing this all the time with your product because your job is to be constantly looking at what the customer is doing and adding new things to the product. You don't do this once and you get a free pass for the rest of the product's life. That never happens. I mean, you have kind of big things and then it just keeps happening on a smaller basis continually. So let's go through an example and see how that sits for you all. So Jen and Jay are our founders. Jen's a general manager in a marketer software company. Jay is a designer who's taught himself programming. They have an idea for an application for families. They have a very general direction on this. They don't exactly know what the right thing is, but they feel like this is a big area, there's a few things out there that do this, but this is a gigantic product area, and nobody's really, become the Facebook or the Twitter of this space. And they feel they may be those people and they want to go after this. But they acknowledge that they don't know exactly what it is yet. So in the ideation phase, the first thing happens is Jen's going to do this. She goes to see, they're both parents, that's where they got the idea, but Jen wants to get out of her element and go talk with some moms and some dads. She goes and visits some cousins in Sacramento and San Diego. She's there not to sit down and ask these people a bunch of questions or specifically validate one thing or another. She's there to just watch what these people do, observe them. She has a list of specific questions, so she stays organized and makes her notes in a way that she can go back and present them in a meaningful way, but she's not there, sitting there asking them a questionnaire, yes, no, what percentage said this, that. She's taking notes on Evernote on her smartphone so that she's kind of low key about this. She's there to observe, not have a formal interaction with these folks. See these people go to soccer games and get the kids to do the chores, disperse allowances, all these different family things. And she's also there to see if do they use Facebook? How do they do it? Do they send each other emails? What happens? And so she comes back with pages of notes, photos, video, nothing specific yet, just lots of observation about these people, this persona, the mom and the dad, managing a family. And she distills these things into stories to help her and help Jay start coalescing their ideas of what these people actually do. So just to go back to the stories thing, as a parent, that's the persona. I want to put a roster of chores up so that's the do something, so that I can link it to handing out the kids' allowances. That's the drive event. Why do they want to do this? So they go through these things, and after they have a little bit of a chance to digest them and distill them, they realize a few things. First, there's very little expressed interest in organizational tools for the family among these parents. They just don't find that. It's just not there. But the good thing is organization is in fact a real problem. Getting the kids to the right place and having everybody show up and it's a bona fide problem. They acknowledge that. So what does this mean? Well, it means that the thing can't be pitched as an organizational tool. It doesn't mean that this is a no-go. I mean, we didn't know that our social lives were broken and we needed to spend hours a week on a website until we had Facebook, right? They also learned that the power users, the parents actually do a bit of this using technology to organize the family. They're relatively happy. There's no hugely broken thing that they wish they had. But they also find, which is good, that these communities self-reference a lot. Nobody goes to college to be a mom or a dad. These people are helping each other out. They're putting things on Facebook, getting together and talking. And that's great because this means there's pivotal users that Jen and Jay can go to, show prototypes, and see if their thing's going to resonate, whether they have a proposition or not. Lastly, one interesting thing they learned by talking to these folks is that they have a desire to be offline more, not online more. And so all these families grapple with creating slow time, quality time together. And that's one thing they kept bringing up, when Jen was probing about, what do you want to do? And so their idea is, well, our app's going to be about this creation of quality time, of slow time. That's their proposition. Try to bear with me, I'm not actually an expert on families or the software that they use. So their idea is they're going to create this thing called Pheasant. Pheasant is a bird with maternal instincts. I actually don't know if that's really true. So it's a web application. It has its own primary interface. It'll have a Facebook app, so they can interact with it through Facebook, and it can interact with Facebook. There'll be a mobile app, so they can interact with it on the go, and it'll send emails out. And it's a basic, what is this thing? They start drafting stories. One thing you'll find when you sit down to do these stories is you'll have a lot of them. There'll be a ton of them. And there's a few tools you can use to organize them. There's this idea of epic stories, which then encapsulate stories underneath them. And that's a good way to keep your stories organized. You also find a lot of additional details, like I want them to be able to use Diners Club card as well as MasterCard. And those things get put in as test cases against stories. And that's the most consumable, actionable way to supplement the stories. So let's look at an example of that. Here's an epic story from before that we talked about. We're going to go through a couple of individual stories related to this. So the first story is, as a parent, I want to create a list of chores so that I can divvy them out to my kids. This is about the chores thing. So a test case on this would be, well, make sure there's a preset list of chores to choose from when they're doing this. Make sure that as the person's typing in the chore, you suggest autocomplete options for them so they can just pick one. Make sure that the user can assign a value for an allowance to the chore as they're creating it. Make sure it's possible to schedule the frequency of the chore by relative, like weekly, daily, or absolute terms, like a set of days. So this is an example of how test cases get created and related to a story. And this is just a very good tactical way to organize your input to development and make sure you cover your bases yourself. Here's another example. As a parent, I want to list my kids so that I can assign chores to them. You want to make sure it's possible to allocate the chores to kids as you create the chores, so you don't have to go back and do that, and make sure it's possible to set a target allowance for each kid. So I don't know how many of you do software development now? Raise your hand. Just you. So the, what you'll find is that this is a very consumable way for developers to understand your intent. It'll probably help you make sure you've got your bases covered as well. All inspiration stuff and doing startup aside, on just a day-to-day basis, this is a great way to describe what you want. So let's talk about the planning of this venture. How are they actually going to do this? Well, they're going to list out their assumptions first. First assumption, families have a substantial desire to organize quality time. And that needs to be proven, at least in the sense that they need. So things they can do, they can run ads online with that proposition, Google AdWords, ads on Facebook, very cheap, easy, low entry costs to do that. And then the links to those ads, they can have those people go to landing pages with various propositions around organizing that quality time and see how people respond. Do they sign up? Do they click through those pages a lot? Families are on Facebook. Does not need to be proven. No problem. Families use mobile apps. Also does not need to be proven. Families will find the pheasant solution credible. Families will believe that Jen and Jay's application is actually going to help them create quality time. They can test the signups against a more detailed proposition that they formulate. They can start creating informational content to send to these families, and they can do beta tests. But the more that Jen and Jay actually dig into this, the more they question whether they really have the capability to do this. They're not family organization gurus. So as they start to grapple with this, they look to pivot and they look to think about other things. There's a guy named Jack Chernow, who is a self-help guru. He writes books about how to create quality time with the family and organize the family. It's not a real guy, so. They go to Jack. He loves the idea of putting his ideas into an app, and he wants to work with him. So that's great. And this is a synthetic example, but this whole idea about having a content component to what you're going to release, especially in the consumer space, is increasingly relevant. In the consumer space, customers are increasingly paying for content rather than just pure technology. This is a definite theme of things that are coming out. A lot of it is social content, organically generated, but a lot of it is not. So now they go through, and their next assumption is they get comfortable with this thing. The next assumption that they have is families will find, will find purchase traction with these readily identifiable influencers, these pivot parents that they identified at the beginning. And again, that's really actually going to be much easier than they thought, because they know who these people are. Jen met some of them. These are the parents who blog a lot and post a lot on Facebook. They're relatively easy to identify. So they'll be able to take this to people, these pivotal users, and see if they're barking up the right tree, which is great. And then the last assumption, this really encapsulates their first iteration of their business, is that once they get to these pivotal users, those people will propagate the product, tell their friends about it, and that's how they'll get user acquisition. That's how they'll get new customers. So a couple things about this idea of organic or viral user acquisition. So good is not equal to viral. I mean, something's funny or interesting, it does go viral and it propagates and people share it, but that's not always as true as it looks. Many of the things that are kind of hailed in tech mythology as having been viral were actually very closely choreographed. And it's definitely not a good way, it's only a hopeful way to think about user acquisition. It's not a constructive way. So it's very important to think about how this first set of users that you're going to go get is going to help you parlay that organically into acquisition of other types of users. And the most long-standing framework on this is called the technology adoption lifecycle. It was supplemented by a guy named Jeff Moore, who introduced the idea that between these very early enthusiasts that you'll get is this big chasm before you get to the mainstream market. And that's still true. This was a little more applicable when buying technology and producing technologies about these big platform bets and buying hardware and making big commitments. I mean, the switching cost on an app is very low. It's not zero. Spend your time, figure it out, and bother with it. But it's much lower than buying a PC versus a Mac or all this sort of Coke and Pepsi stuff that used to happen in high tech. So this is still applicable, but a simpler, more robust way to look at it might be billiards or pool. The first thing, I'm not a great pool player, but the first thing that I learned was, after I learned how to hit the ball, you have to look at where you're going to leave the cue ball, the white ball, after the shot that you make. Because your goal isn't to just get one ball in, it's to get multiple balls in and leave yourself in a position to keep progressing on the table. That's a good way to think about user acquisition in terms of segments. And it's important, the main point is, make sure you lay that stuff out in your assumptions in a way that you can actually measure. Because if you don't, you may be either headed for a glass wall, every month you get 20% new folks, great, and then all of a sudden it stops. Or you may be painting yourself into a corner with user acquisition where you're going to have a really tough time. Or worst of all, you may be missing an opportunity to get customers that you're underexploiting. It's actually happening, and your data would show it to you if you looked at it, but you're underexploiting that. This is the business model canvas that we talked about earlier. So we're going to quickly fill this out for Pheasant. Their segments are families with kids. The value propositions that they're going to go after are quality of life improvement and convenience and usability. Remember, convenience and usability is secondary. They kind of ruled that out on their initial investigation. That wasn't what people really cared about. Channels, well, they have the Jack Cheer Now site. That's going to be great because that's a pre-qualified audience of people that care about this. They will distribute the app through Facebook, iTunes, and the Android store. They may test ads there. Customer relationships. So they're going to have dedicated personal assistants for these pivot parents, these people that they're initially learning a lot from. And that's partly because a lot of the most important things that happen with their app will happen offline. But obviously, the mainstream market is a self-service thing. You sign up for it, you use it on the web. On revenue streams, they're going to do ads and sponsorships. They have to be careful, but they have a very coherent, well-formulated demographic that they're going to be producing this for, which is good. That's what advertisers like.
Can you talk about what the difference between advertising and sponsorship is?
Yeah. Advertising is very transactional. It's like, hey, we're going to post down on the site every nth impression. And sponsorship is a larger, more persistent presence on your media. So something where it's like Six Flags, is going to pay for the whole site and offer coupons and be on the site for a long time in a more involved, multi-offer or multi-format fashion. It's not a black and white distinction, but it's ads are just sort of like, hey, you may get those from like an ad sharing network or something like that. Sponsorship's a little more involved.
It's more like a partnership.
More like a partnership. And then they'll have premium subscriptions where users pay to be on a mobile device or for more content. They'll figure that out as they go along. So key resources they have are Jack. They've kind of hitched their wagon to each other. They recognize that. It's very strong user experience. That's what the UX stands for. And then development. Key activities. Well, the number one thing is about problem solving around quality time. I mean, everybody that works for Pheasant needs to be completely obsessed with how parents do this and what they're doing with the app and how it's actually working out for them. That's their reason for being right now. That's what they do. And then they may be able to eventually parlay this into other activities. Their key partners are Jack Cheer Now, and then this format, if they validate it here, it may work out somewhere else. Like maybe they do shopping lists with a celebrity chef or nutritionist or something. Similar activities, similar markets, similar format, similar content relationship. Cost structure, they have a very strong fixed cost basis. Most tech companies do. And they're going to pay royalties to Jack for his content as they go along. This is an output from the financial model. There's a version of this on alexandercowan.com/finplan. It'll be online by August 15th if you're looking for a template. There's lots of, you can also just Google it. There's lots of great financial models out there. Actually, they're not. We should go use this one. If you find one that's good, let me know. I never have. The first thing they do is they put about $290K into the company. Now, half of that, it goes to pay Jen and Jay's salary. So they're putting it in themselves. They both have working spouses, which is going to allow them to make a go of this for ECO for 8 months. They think that their first pivot, their first iteration is going to take them 4 months. So putting the business together financially for 8 months gives them the opportunity to do two or so pivots, which is good. Well, it gives them an opportunity to apply things that they learn on their first iteration if they're a little off. So the next thing you'll notice here is their subcontractor expenses kind of ramp over the first few months. A very typical mistake for these bootstrapped startups is that the founders hire developers right away because they feel like they got to have that before they really know what they want to build. And that's bad because obviously you're spending money. You're going to put this developer off if you're like, we actually want to do something totally different here. So they're kind of ramping up development as they validate their proposition and what they want to do. And finally, they're hoping to have some relevant material revenue towards the end of this period, but they've completely zeroed that out in their model. Because they don't want to be scrambling for money at the last minute. You know, they just want to assume the revenue away for this early period. So let's go through this, what they've done in summary. The slow time thing emerged from, you asked before about like, what if you just don't know what you want to do? How does all this stuff work? Well, they had a direction. I mean, you got to have something. You got to know if you're going to make a, blender or floor wax or a web app or what. But they go out and, they go and they talk to these personas and they learn about them. That's their first step. And that's how they figure out if there's really a pony there or not. So they actually trashed kind of their old idea and they reformulated something in a similar direction. They create these assumptions about what is going to need to come true for the business to work. That's their hypothesis. They've created a way for themselves to validate those early and cheaply. And then they're going to be able to say, look, were we right about this? Are people using this thing? Do they care about it still? Do these pivotal moms, what feedback are they giving us? Does this thing have any relevance? Are they telling us, we like what you did, but actually shopping list was the thing we really wanted now that you asked us? And then they'll either revise, they've left themselves some room for that, or they'll say great, and they'll go raise some more money and make it a big company, start scaling the whole model up with the evidence to present to whoever they need to go to for money or hiring or whatever, that the whole thing makes sense. So on organization, Jen and Jay do the initial feasibility by themselves. They have all the tools that they need to validate the idea. Then when they expand their customer development, it's Jen and Jay, they hire this guy, Mikhail, who's going to do the mobile development. Jack's doing the media, Jack's generally the author. And Ruben and Rita help out Jay on systems, putting up servers to run this stuff, and web applications. Rita's a senior developer. They do not need to worry about what the organization is going to look like in 5 years, but they do need to designate roles and responsibilities. We actually do this at Wayne. We have a lot of repetition in our org chart, and that doesn't mean that they're going to act like a big company. Because for instance, she's taking on the responsibility to be the CEO, but she's also reporting to Jay in this docs capacity here. And this is a perfectly okay thing at a startup. What's not really necessarily a good idea is to institutionalize around individuals. Because that way nobody knows what anybody else is doing. Once you start getting new hires in or people that are helping out with the business, nobody knows who does what, and it's all confused. And the other thing is, you got to give people the latitude to understand, okay, look, you make the final decision in this area, it's your call. So Jen and Jay started out with a relatively strong set of capabilities, but depending on where you're coming from, you can very easily create a core set of capabilities to do a lot of the initial work on your startup. It's possible for everybody. My recommendation is start with these foundation concepts, things we've talked about today. Then you want to establish just a very, very rudimentary basic degree of technical literacy. This does not mean learning how to code. It absolutely does not mean that. The things you want to get a grasp on are software fundamentals, the model, view, controller framework is a really, really easy, digestible way to understand the way software fits together and how to decompose its different parts and think about them and discuss them with the technical team. It's good to have a basic idea about architecture, what's the difference between an API integration and a plugin integration, and how do these mobile apps communicate to our web service and things. And then it's good to understand roles and systems in a technical team. What's the difference between a sysadmin and a developer? What are the systems that they use? What do I need to care about, not care about? What should I expect from these different job roles? And then the next thing is, it's good to learn the basics of Agile as a product owner. This doesn't mean you put yourself in a position to run a development team. It just means that you understand the basics of how Agile works as the business owner, the product expert, so that you can collaborate in a structured but constructive and creative way with your team. Scaling, if you're scaling, it's good to learn about process design. It sounds like the dullest thing in the world, but actually it'll really help you, especially if you're new to being a manager, avoid a lot of wasted time and wasted effort. Then you can look at different specialties, different programming languages if you're interested, being a sysadmin, analytics. I have a couple peers, and their view is, well, if you're a non-technical founder, learn how to code. It's not that hard. And it's not a bad idea, but I think it's very misguided, because learning how to program is terrific and it can be really enjoyable and intellectually stimulating, but you want to really understand these foundation ideas so you can figure out, if you really want to do that, and if you do, what exactly do you want to learn and why, and it gives you the foundation to participate more meaningfully in technology and business, whether it's a startup or a company you work at. So last thing we're going to cover here is development. So in the first iteration, which they're going to do 3-week-long iterations, they're working on their look and feel, putting all these sign-up things and analytics up on the site so they can do these early tests and validations of their ideas. Jack, the author, is working on weekly exercises. This is just stuff people can sign up and get on email to see how they like that stuff and how they're responding. And then he's going to work on the first version of his interactive program. After that, it is, remember, Agile's not waterfall, so they don't know exactly what's going to be in those subsequent iterations, and it's not their idea to know. They have a directional view that the second iteration will do their first interactive version of the product. The second one, they'll have the design for their mobile app and release their initial version of that. And then they just don't know what they're going to do in the subsequent iterations, and it's one of the great things about Agile is acknowledging without any trepidation what you don't know, which is very important to do in a startup, because there's a lot of things you don't know. So that's it. If you, we're going to do some examples and things if we have enough time. We went a little over with questions, but I think we're good. Yes?
Just to check on the time, so about 7:15, so I want to be sure
to be done.
Mindful of your time and everyone else.
Yes. Okay. So
speed us through or take some final questions.
I think we'll skip the workshop part. I'm going to do a screencast version of some of this on alexandercowan.com, my website. I usually put up some new stuff every week, and I send out a tweet. I tweet now. So if you want to get a feed of that stuff, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm CowanSF. And all this stuff's on alexandercowan.com. So I'll have a bunch of resources, templates, starting points for this stuff. And again, the book, buy the book or don't buy the book, but the book is, I wrote it because I felt like there wasn't a good, digestible, actionable distillation of all this stuff out there, and that's what it sort of is. We're going to go to the Slow Club after this, and if anybody buys a book, they'll get 2 drink tickets back, and we're dealing with through us, not the Slow Club. They don't know anything about this. Okay? Thanks a lot. Do you guys have questions? And anybody who feels like they want to leave now, they can leave. I won't, that's fine. You want to buy a book? Sarah has it.
This video will be on the website?
Yes. Yes, it will. I don't know how good it's going. We haven't tested that yet. But there'll also be a screencast version. There's already a screencast version, in fact, of the first segment. And there'll be a screencast version of the second segment in, depending on how late I stay out, maybe tomorrow, maybe the end of the week.
And is this in the book, what you just presented?
Absolutely. It's the best 250 pages you'll ever experience. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. I think, there's a lot of great stuff on the web that you can pick up, piece of this and that. I think, the book experience, as outmoded as a paper book maybe is to some people, it's still, there's something different about a book. You get very involved, you kind of engross yourself in it, it's thorough, it's, coherent. And there's, by the way, there's a lot of good books in the area, and I have a list of other books on the resources section of the website that I would encourage you to also check out. Yes?
What's the best way to approach a prospective customer with whom you're trying to develop a persona? It's one thing to go ask your relative, but you're going to get a different answer from a relative than you do from somebody else. But
people love to talk about themselves for the most part. I've just shown you that. It's much easier than you might think. I would just tell them, you're trying to develop something in their area, you have a few general questions and a few specific questions. Tell them how much time that you want from them, and I think you'll find it's a lot easier than you might think. Some people are going to tell you to, they don't care, they don't want to talk to you. It's kind of like going door to door. I mean, some people just aren't going to want to do it. And that, but you just have to. It's a little bit like being a salesperson. You got to pitch it a couple times, and not everybody's going to take. But definitely, I think you'll have a very easy time getting people if you keep at it. Yes?
A lot of companies, especially tech companies these days, talk about being driven by data, and all their decisions are based upon data they have. You've given a couple examples about early on you don't have a lot of data, but kind of what's your thought on the whole, hey, we're driven by data?
I think that a couple things. It's overall, it's good. The alternative is something that they call HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion. Have you heard that? Yeah. So that's not good. I think that overall, I mean, the whole idea of the laying out those assumptions and acquiring data, like do people sign up for this? How do I get measurable things? Is good, and it's much better than what the alternative was. But it's, the one thing you have to be careful of is there's a tendency to overascribe importance to things that are quantitative and measurable, and believe too much in those, and put too much credence in those numbers. So I think the most important thing is two things. One is to keep perspective of, data as a supplement to these more empathic, things, these personas, these stories. And the second thing is, and the biggest problem people recognize about that data-driven approach is that it's very easy to end up at kind of a local maximum. If you're just looking at the data and we did A, B, and C, which one did they pick the most? It's very easy to over-rely on that data and get stuck in a very small place. There's a great story that I'm actually not sure it's true, but it's the best version of it. That Sony did a focus group, data-driven thing, and they said, hey, we have this yellow Walkman we're thinking of rolling out. Do you like it? And everybody said, oh God, it's great. It makes me feel sporty, and it's fun, it's so much more interesting than your black Walkman was. I didn't like that at all. And then somebody had the foresight to put 2 piles of Walkmans on the table on the way out the door. And everybody participated, was allowed to take one. Everybody took the black Walkman. So that's another reason why, depending on, some data is really good and some of it's really crummy. That's the other thing,
But early on, when you maybe don't have a lot of data, how do you
get data? It's easy, Post ads online on Google Ads with your proposition. First of all, it really depends on what data is germane to your proposition. If you're going to sell your thing online, post the stuff online and see how people respond to it. If you're going to sell it in some other way, hand carry it, you may want to try something different. But overall, this idea of putting ads up that lead to landing pages and seeing how people click through those is really good. It's very effective. It actually really does work, and it's much. If you've never done it and you're set up on Google AdWords, it's amazingly easy. They've done a really good job.
So can it be as simple as doing a poll, let's say on Facebook, saying, would you use an app in order to ...
I would caution you, that's the Sony thing I think you're going to get a lot of. Yeah. I mean, you never want to, it's very problematic to ask the customer direct questions like that. Would you like this? You're going to get a lot of BS back. Are they not lying to you, but they're just, direct questioning like that is very problematic. I think you're much better off, let's go back to the example of Jen and Jay, okay? Let's say they're doing the food list thing, and they want to know, do people in our segment worry about carcinogens in potatoes? Something like that. That you can post a poll about, right? What's your level of concern about carcinogens in potatoes or produce or whatever? High, low, medium, I don't know, I'm not aware of it. That kind of thing, you can get reasonable data with those kind of polls. More abstract stuff of like, do you think you would like something like very problematic? You're usually going to get very poor data back, just because customers aren't trained to think through your stuff that way.
So you're validating your assumptions.
Always analysis and validation.
Yeah, you want to have a very, I mean, you want to match the data, is data good or bad? Well, it depends on the data. You really need to match your data collection to the, the fidelity of the response that you're going to get. And I think, specific close-ended questions like that are much better when they're very specific. You're trying to answer a very, very specific, discrete question. That's my opinion. Sorry, so yes?
At what stage the co-founders consider the hiring process, like before generating revenue or generating?
At what stage do you consider the hiring process of more employees?
Yeah.
Well, I would, you always want to hire people as late as you possibly can, right, to avoid spending the money. I think that said, you need to identify the rarity of the talent that you need. Are you trying to hire somebody that they're 1 in 100 or 1 in 10? Like if you need to hire somebody with a very special skill set, you should give yourself more lead time. And it's interesting that there's actually, I talked about the technical literacy stack. The thing about architecture, there's a lot of different components you can use, especially when you build software. And one of the things I mentioned in the book is that, if you're thinking of how there's 4 open source billing systems out there, and I think I want to use an open source billing solution for some reason. Take each one, go to Career Builder, put it in, and see how many people list that open source package on their resume. And that'll tell you how tough it's going to be to find the talent that you want. So it's important when you're in the early stage to let hiring drive some of your architecture decisions. Because it's very, it's a common thing of like, well, this package seems good. Well, it's really all about, you're just going to spend all your money on staff. not this open source stuff, or even if it's commercial sub-license, you're gonna spend all your money on staff. So you want to hire stuff, you want to use components where there's lots of people that know how to work on them, they're cheap, they're available, it's well understood, and the reverse, is also true. I mean, that's a little bit of a weak answer, but I think you can help yourself a lot in the hiring process that way. The other thing is, you'll have, I go to a lot of these, I'm like a coach or whatever at these like tech meetup things, like, have a startup idea and work on it over the weekend. The number one thing and there's a lot of people who have an idea, they're trying to, court engineers to, go work on this stuff. So people who have a really well articulated idea, they have something resembling personas and stories, it makes it a lot easier to attract talent. If an engineer thinks that, I just picking engineers because they're, especially around here, they're the hardest and most expensive resource you're going to hire in most cases for most things. If you show them like, look, we have this fantastic product design, that's hugely attractive to a lot of engineers, because that tells them, oh, this is great. I'm going to be able to go in here, tear into this, build something really cool. These people know what they want. If they're like, there's this non-technical person who, gosh, I'm going to have to train them to figure out what they want, and they're going to get mad at me because they're going to say I built the wrong thing. That's going to hurt you in your hiring. So a lot of this stuff you do at the front end can really, really help you in the hiring process a lot with technical talent. Sorry, what was your question?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, you had mentioned creative destruction earlier in one of the slides. I was wondering what that was.
That was in reference to, Jen and Jay had this idea of, well, we think we're going to build organizational tools for families. And they turned out to be wrong. So they were ready to discard that idea. That was and move on to this idea of, focusing on quality time. It's really important in a startup to not to hold any of your assumptions too dearly. And that's the nice thing about that iterative framework is everything gets treated as an assumption, not an article of faith, not a personal statement of how smart somebody is that they thought that.
I think we have time maybe for one more. Is there one last question?
Yes.
I don't have tech experience or programming. I have an idea for a tech startup. How do I bring people on board without giving away my ideas?
You can. I would vet your idea.
Have to be open, or you just have to be open with everyone?
No, absolutely not. I mean, every disclosure about I grapple with this a lot, and I have I work with Laura and her team, and they have an idea, and they talk about it because it's big. They need support from a lot of different constituencies. I have another team who I was like, they're in a space that's so hot and the barriers to entry are so low. I was like, don't talk to anyone about this. And in fact, I went and talked to a buddy of mine in town who's in their industry about their first idea. Their second idea was so good, I was like, we're not talking to Charles about this. We should really keep this tight for a little while until you're a little bit further along, because it's a really good idea, I think, at least. And but the barriers for somebody to come in and do it on you are very low. So it's a calculated risk. And my recommendation, if you're worried about disclosure, is push the idea along as far as you can. Do this stuff yourself, because you're a smart guy. You're infinitely capable of doing it. Do that stuff. Get your idea a little bit further along, and then show these people. Because the other thing when you disclose is that, if it looks like I'm doing this, I know what I'm doing. I think you put yourself a little bit less risk than if you're like, hey, I have this general idea. But if it's your best friend, tell them. It's everything's a calculated risk. But there's a lot of things you can do to help yourself.
Can you file a provisional patent for $100 and it'll cover it for 1 year?
You can, but it really depends on what the idea is. Very few ideas in software are really patentable. But they're copyrightable. Like nobody can just blatantly copy your stuff. Nothing we have a lien in is patented. Not a single thing, and that's very common in the area. So. Yes, you can file a provisional patent, but you have the same problem there. I mean, the whole, if you leave anything out of your patent, that will invalidate the patent. Right? The whole point of the patent is you're thorough. If you're like, no, we didn't talk about this thing that we do because we don't want, our competitor to steal it, then your patent just got completely overturned and voided. You'll never get a full patent. So
does an NDA work in instances like that?
An NDA helps. It doesn't, they're very difficult to enforce. But it shows people, the biggest thing is just making people really understand that you really don't want them to tell anybody else. And my view about NDAs is that they help in that regard. The other thing is it depends on your audience. An investor will not sign an NDA. I can't sign NDAs, now that I've mentioned these tech companies, because I could be putting my other teams, in harm's way. But we use NDAs with Lean all the time, and I think they're a good idea. They're out on the internet, they're cheap and easy to get, they're very standard. There's no very rarely negotiation about a reasonable NDA form, and it shows. Most important thing, it shows people you really don't want to do anything else. Most people, especially in the Valley, really respect that.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming.
We invite you to join him at Slow Club down the street if you want to talk further. And please, if you don't mind, just set your wine glasses if you have them on the table in the hall. Thanks again for coming out, and we hope to see you again soon at BAVC.
Grab a copy of the book.
Sir, what?